Hi, welcome back to another edition of Speak Up for Blue TV, where you get the latest, greatest, and maybe not so greatest ocean news happening around the world today, and you get my take on it. And I'm Andrew Lewin, founder of SpeakUpForBlue.com, a website dedicated to supporting the ocean conservation movement with awareness, education, and action. Welcome to the show. Today we're going to do a little bit different. Normally I break down the news and everything, and this story today that we're going to talk about is more a bit of an education aspect, and in a way, I guess, a bit of an awareness, but it's opening up the lines of discussion on the ocean, and a particular issue on the west coast of North America in the North Pacific Ocean. We're going to talk about ocean connection in general, but we're really going to focus on the sea otter story. So stay tuned, and let's get in. Stay tuned. Let's get into it, and let's see what kind of discussion we can get out of it. So let's just talk a little bit about ocean connections and food webs in particular. So everything, if you don't already know, the ocean is one big ocean. Yes, there are 5 oceans around the world that are dedicated, named, and everything, in different habitats and whatnot and species. However, it's all connected, and in particular, it's connected within what eats what. So predator and prey relationships, and what we call it in the science world, we call it food webs. In the ecology world, we call it food webs. So what a food web is essentially is different layers in the ocean of predators and prey. So we're talking about who eats who in this kind of situation. So in this particular example that we're going to discuss today, we're going to talk about sea otters. And normally sea otters, you find them, they're cute and they're cuddly and they have a lot of character. You see them lying on their backs trying to rip open clams and mussels and things like that. And they're a really cool kind of animal to see. I've seen them at aquariums. I've seen them in the wild. And they're a lot of fun to watch because they're always busy trying to do something, and they have a bit of a character. They're somewhat curious about humans, and they're a lot of fun. But they're also, what a lot of people don't realize, is they are an apex predator. That's right, they are an apex predator, just like sharks and things like that. Yes, they get eaten by sharks and killer whales or orcas and things like that. However, they are an apex predator in themselves, and we're going to go over how important this is in just a minute. So let's talk. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about sea otters and what they've done and what they've been through, because it is quite an interesting story. Back in the day, about 150 to 100 years ago, maybe even longer, sea otters were really, known and sought after for their fur and their pelts. They were hunted, so much so that they almost became extinct. They were endangered for quite a while. Now, since that time, scientists and conservationists and ecologists and people who love sea otters really worked hard to bring them back to where they are today, which is quite abundant, booming even. Some say probably more than before, but I don't have the exact number, so I'm not too sure. However, they are booming and they are doing quite well, and I think they're actually off the endangered list. So that recovery, that extinction, and the recovery really changed the way the North Pacific was, especially in certain characteristics. And I'll go through essentially the bit of the feeding ecology of a sea otter. Sea otter eats sort of small, hard invertebrates. So they eat shellfish like oysters, clams, mussels, things like that. They also eat sea urchins. And particular sea urchins, because sea urchins are important in this kind of story. When the sea otters were almost extinct and they kept being hunted and they are endangered, the sea urchin population boomed, almost out of control. And sea urchins actually eat algae and plant life. And when the population boomed, they ate as much algae as they could, but also they ate a lot of kelp. And if you don't already know, the North Pacific is really known for their large and luscious kelp forests. Large, not only in spatial extent, but large as in height. The vertical space that they took up was amazing. 40, 50, 60, 70 feet, even more. These large kelps just floating up in the water column, providing a lot of hiding spots for prey, for young fish, even large commercial fish, like commercially and recreationally important fish. So people who would actually fish these areas because there are so many fish. It's just a wonderful thing. People were diving in these kelp forests because they loved them so much. They were spearfishing. People would kayak over them and still see the plants floating over them. It's just a wonderful, wonderful habitat. But when the population of sea urchins boomed, the kelp population and the kelp forest just kind of diminished slowly and slowly and slowly until there was a lot of point where people thought that if everything continued the way it was, that the kelp forest would actually disappear eventually. Well, as the recovery started to happen with sea otters, the sea urchin population started to go down, and the otter population started to come up. So obviously, sea urchins were a very important part of the diet. But with the sea urchin population going down, the kelp forest came back up, and it was really important. Now, to this day, the kelp forests are practically back to what they were. I'm not sure if they are exactly what they were. I don't have all the facts, but the general idea is that they're increasing. The diversity within the kelp forests are increasing. Protect the kelp forests. I forgot to mention the kelp forests actually also protect the coastline from wave energy. They slow down the waves a little bit so that there's less erosion on the beaches and things like that. So they're very important in terms of coastal security, where they decrease wave action. It could be also important, down the line if there's ever a bit of a tsunami or things like that. It could decrease the impact a little bit. It'll still be bad, terrible. I hope it never happens, but it'll decrease through wave action, through decreasing the energy of the wave. So anyway, so there's a lot of things a lot of important, what we call ecosystem services. So a lot of services that these kelp forests provide, where the sea otter is an apex predator that controls, essentially, indirectly, the kelp forests and the habitat and how big they get and how lush they get. So here comes the dilemma. There's always a dilemma in this situation. I mean, it's a great story that, they went in danger, the sea otters went in danger, and then they came back, and they're now almost fully recovered. But there's always a problem. While the sea otters were being hunted for their fur pelts and the population went down to almost endangered, or to be endangered and almost extinct, fishermen that were fishing for shellfish really thrived because nothing was eating the shellfish. So they really thrived. Now, with this remarkable recovery of the sea otters, not only are the sea otters eating urchins, but they're also eating shellfish like clams and oysters and mussels. So the population of shellfish are going down as well, just like the urchin population is going down. It's being a little controlled, but a little too much for the fishermen. Their yield. So yield is how many tons of shellfish they collect every year are going down. They're being impacted by sea otters. Okay, the sea otter population. So that's the dilemma. The fishermen are suffering in terms of monetary value. They're not making as much money because they're not catching as much. Where the environment is thriving again because they actually got control. So there's a bit of, you see the dilemma here. I mean, obviously the environment's doing well, but the fishermen want to be able to fish some more. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, tried to put some solutions together where they closed off habitats for sea otters. So certain sections were known where it was good to fish shellfish, where they were known as great spots to fish. They were, the fishermen would actually go there, and sea otters would, if they try and get in the boundaries, U.S. Fish and Wildlife would trap them, and then they would alive, and then they would take them, relocate them somewhere else where they could still thrive. But eventually, either they'd come back or more would come in, and they'd keep doing it. Well, now the U.S. Fish and Wildlife are actually thinking of, eliminating those closed areas because it's difficult to manage. There's always going to be sea otters going, especially when they know that, sea otters know that, shellfish are untouched and they can go get some. And who is to say that otters can't go anywhere? See where the dilemma's coming in? I kind of support the elimination of these areas because I find it ridiculous and probably very costly to keep monitoring and trapping and relocating each sea otter. So anyway, so now the fishermen are kind of upset. But other solutions are trying to control the sea otter population. So in southeast Alaska, they're actually trying to open up the sea otters to hunting. So just like they do in Canada, here in Canada with the harp seals, they're trying to control the population so that fishing can actually come back and fishermen can actually make a monetary value. So that is the dilemma. Now here's my opinion on it. I know fishermen probably won't like this, but since I'm a marine biologist and a conservation, I tend to lean towards the environment a little more. But I still respect that the fishermen need to, need to make a living, especially shellfish fishermen. And if their shellfish are getting impacted, it's a real problem. It's a real risk. But the fact is that sea otter was doing well at one point. They didn't do well because of humans in the first place. Now they're doing well because we help them recover by stopping the hunting and having rehabilitation and restoration programs. But now I think we should just leave them be. Let them thrive. If they thrive naturally, then that's fine. They thrive naturally. And if shellfish populations are kind of minimized or they kind of go down a little bit, well, that's just the way it was before, and it should be now. That's just the way the environment works. Mother Nature kind of tends to balance itself out every once in a while. Sometimes, the populations will go up of sea otters, and sometimes they'll go down. And vice versa. The population of shellfish will go down when sea otters are up, and then they'll go up when sea otters are down. This is just what happens. This is life. This is Mother Nature. This is the ocean. Now, for the fisherman side, unfortunately, I just think that's a risk that the fishermen always take. And it sucks that it has to do it, but every business has a risk. And they need to adapt to that risk. And they need to have plans. And they need to have potentially other species that they could fish or maybe go into farming or something like that. I know it's more complicated than that, but that's just my opinion on it. So I'm going to leave it to you now. The question of the day, whose side are you on? Are you on the environment side or are you on the fisherman side? So put your answer down in the comments below. I'd really like to open up the discussion, and nobody's right or wrong in this situation. I just want to hear what you think is necessary to ensure that both parties kind of win, because this is what's going to happen. Is both parties are going to have to compromise, and somebody's going to have to lose a little bit, and somebody's going to have to win a little bit. So, what's your opinion? Let me know in the comments below. There's links to the story, the original story, in the description below. And of course, subscribe, check out this week's last episodes, and click on the annotation below to look at anything we've ever done at speakupforblue.com on YouTube. And of course, speakupforblue.com, check out the website, take a look at the articles, add comments, share the articles as much as possible. We're trying to get people aware of the ocean so that discussions can happen and solutions can happen out of it, because out of discussions come solutions. So share as much as possible. Share with your family, your friends, and your network. And as usual, my name is Andrew Lewin, founder of speakupforblue.com. I will see you next week. Happy conservation.